the government. That's why I went. And I had only a year to do my research, and I had to study Dutch for the first couple of months because my parents spoke Dutch at home, like a lot of second-generation immigrants, but not with us. They spoke it as a secret language between themselves, so I knew a few Dutch words. So I didn't have much time, but it didn't take long for me to discover, well, the Dutch had policies that encouraged women to stay at home. So, as I already said, if you're healthy, you couldn't, like in the US, if you're having a baby, the first person you call, in most cases, is an obstetrician. In the Netherlands, you can't do that. They have the gatekeeping system, and you have to go to a primary caregiver. Usually a midwife, sometimes a general practitioner. So they had a rule that said you can't go. So that's one system. The insurance company wouldn't pay for specialized care. So that seemed like a very simple. I was only there for like 4 months already. It's like, well, that's an obvious answer, because they've structured their healthcare system in a way to direct women to give birth at home. And so women, well, that's what, they won't pay me to be in a hospital. This is what we pay for. This is what I do. But then I thought, of course, wait a minute. Why didn't Belgium do that? Why didn't Germany do that? Why didn't England do that? What is it about the Dutch that they thought it was so important that they should enshrine birth at home in their healthcare system? So it was actually embedded in the way they paid for healthcare, the way they trained midwives, because midwives had a very extensive education. They were trained with obstetricians who got to know midwives and felt like, yeah, we know what you do, you know what we do. When you run into a problem, you give us a call, you bring the woman in, you transfer care. I mean, unlike what happens in the United States, where obstetricians are trained over here and midwives are trained over there. They're kind of, you're too medical, you're not medical enough, I don't trust you, I don't trust you. Well, in the Netherlands, it was, they trained together and they knew what each other did. So I had to ask the question, why did the Dutch organize the maternity care system the way they did? And that was a much more complicated question. And this is where I think it helps us understand what's going on in the Netherlands now, and might speak to what you all have to do here in Israel. So being a sociologist, the first part I saw is kind of structural. How do we structure systems? And the second part is cultural. It's like, why do you decide to structure a system the way you do? What are the values? What are the ideas? What are the things you care about? What do you respect? All those questions came up for me. And so the ultimate answer was, it's not just the organization, but it's Dutch cultural ideas. And when I started to look at Dutch culture, I discovered a few things. The Dutch women in particular are quite unique. And there's a sense in which Dutch women are really free compared to other women in Europe, and there's a sense where they're the least free. And that dynamic actually worked to support birth at home. And I'll explain it in a minute, but because it's the idea that birth is it's a woman's world, it should be handled by women. It's a women's event, and we think it should stay in the world of women and not be brought into the world of men and technology and hospitals. So if you look at the history of Dutch women, they're among the first women that could inherit property. And I started to read travelogues from like the 1600s, 1700s, 1800s. And a lot of those travelogues said, unlike the rest of Europe, you find Dutch women out at night by themselves. So they had this kind of liberation. The Dutch economy was an economy characterized by farming, fishing, and trade. And if you think about the role of a wife in that kind of economy, either working together with her farmer husband, or being in charge of the home when the man has gone fishing or off trading. So women had this really powerful role inside the home. And there are a lot of interesting stories of Dutch men feeling like, out here I'm fine, but when I go in the house, everything my wife says I have to do. And there's like stories from the 1600s, 1700s about that's the women's sphere. And birth belongs in that sphere, and home is a place that belongs to women. The other thing I looked at was the idea of home, because first it's about women, but it's also, did the Dutch think differently about home? And again, I'm no historian, but reading history, I discovered that in Europe, the Dutch were the first first society to have the family move from the extended form to the nuclear form. And if you look at Dutch houses, they're really oriented for small family. This is where mom, dad, and the children live. We don't have grandpa and grandma. We don't have the aunts and the uncles. But this is our sphere, our private sphere of our family. And this is where we feel comfortable and at home and safe. Dutch homes are also characterized by being very well lit and very tidy. So all these things made home the logical place to have a baby and keep it as the logical place to have a baby. So you have these ideas of home, you have these ideas of family. There's also, we could talk a little bit about ideas of pain. Interviewing Dutch obstetricians, they thought it was kind of funny, but when people would come in the 60s and 70s and try to understand why you have home birth, it must be because you're Calvinists. And Calvinists are like, just, you know, pain is good for you, it makes you more character. I'm not sure I completely buy that, but there's this idea that the Dutch have a saying, doe maar gewoon. Just do normally, don't be exceptional, don't stand out above the field. Just, you know, it's a little pain, just. And so I did a little bit of research into the Dutch use of medications, and in the 90s it turned out the Dutch, compared to Europe, use far fewer medications, both prescription and over-the-counter medications. So there's a cultural idea about we don't immediately think we need medicine, we don't immediately think we need medical care. So you have this idea of home, you have the roles of women, you have their attitude about medicine. The other thing that I was really struck by when I interviewed Dutch obstetricians, and this must not be true for Israeli obstetricians, is they would always say, look, we're not heroes. We don't want to be the hero. And again, if you think of Dutch culture, this idea here, I just heard this from OBs in interviews, from gynecologists. So I started asking Dutch people, who are your heroes? What kind of heroes do you have in the Netherlands? And a lot of people found that, in the Netherlands, found that to be an odd question. It's like, Van Gogh? Rembrandt? I mean, they didn't have this sense, like in my country, if we ask for heroes, we immediately think of war. We think of battle, and we think of those great patriots in the Revolutionary War and the Civil War and Lincoln. But the Dutch really don't have that idea of like, be heroic. And I saw this with gynecologists. They said, look, if I act like the hero, I get in the way of the father and the mother. This is their event. This is not my event. I don't want to be heroic. If you read sociological accounts of obstetrics in America, they often talk about the gynecologist who is the star. He's the one, typically it's now more women, but then who swoops in, and the spotlight's on the gynecologist, and he pulls out the baby, and it's like, and that's, but Dutch gynecologists really were different in that regard. They really felt like, this is not about me, this is not about me being a hero. And so you start to think about these cultural aspects. You know, why did the Dutch decide this is the way we should organize maternity care? Well, it came out of these cultural ideas. Now, something has changed. So I'll end my talk here, and we can get into any part of it you'd like to talk about. What's happening? Why is home birth declining? And I think several things are going on. I think women are different. So women in the older system were just, well, doe maar gewoon, just have your baby, don't need all the technology. But women now, their lives are different. So it used to be, and it's still partly true, that Dutch women had the highest rate of women who were not in paid labor. So it's very typical for a Dutch woman to work 2 days a week, maybe, or not work at all. And if I had a PowerPoint, I could give you the statistics. It's changing, but they were centered on the home. Now more young women are at work. And the idea of like, I have to work, I have to keep home, I also have to like organize my birth and get everything arranged for my birth at home and be at home. It's just much easier, let me go to the hospital. So there's kind of a cultural change in what the women are doing and how they're then thinking about birth, which if you're a feminist, there's a little bit of a tension there, huh? You don't want to say, oh, go back to the old system, just work 1 day a week. I mean, then we can preserve home birth in the Netherlands. So there's something going on with women's attitude about where should I be for birth and the rest of their lives that also affects midwives. When I was there in the 1990s, 95% of all midwives worked in solo practices. And you women, some of you are probably doing home birth, you won't believe this, but the norm practice, the Dutch, how they pay a midwife in the Netherlands is they figure out what you should make and how many births you should do a year. And then they pay you, here's the sum you should make, you should do this many births, divide this into this is what you get paid for a birth. That's called the norm praktijk. And in '94, the norm praktijk for a Dutch midwife, most of whom were working solo, I'm building this up because you're not going to believe it, was 160 births a year. So if you wanted to make your full salary as a Dutch midwife, you had to attend 160 births a year. What is that, 15 a month?
That's a lot.
That's crazy. Now it's down to 105. So the Dutch midwives have complained, but still, I think if I told you 105, you would have thought, that's a lot. So what's changed is midwives are now working in group practices. And so now only about 5% of Dutch midwives work solo, and 95 work in 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6 together. And what we're finding with young midwife students is they're saying, I want to work 36 hours a week. I don't want to do what my older colleagues in the field have done, which is work like 60 hours a week, being on call all the time, nobody to back you up. I mean, midwives did take vacation and they'd give a Waarneemster, somebody to come in and take their practice, but I don't want to do that. And that link then between the midwife and the woman, where women would choose, I want to have a home birth because I know that you're going to be with me. You're my midwife. I've seen you for prenatal. When I go into labor, you're going to be there. It's you and me. Well, now it's like, well, it might be you, but it might be your colleague. It might be a colleague I only saw one time for a prenatal visit. So the kind of idea of home birth is this unique connection, which I never finished that story about Charlotte and me, but we had 3 babies, 2 at home, and we knew our midwives. And they were there, and when we called them, they came, and they moved in. I mean, I don't know what it's like in Israel, but it's like, yeah, sure, you're in early labor, we're coming over. We're putting the tea kettle on, we're gonna clean up your house, we're gonna hold your hand, we're gonna breathe through, we're gonna be your mother, your doula, your...
We don't clean. We make soup.
No.
Chicken soup.
Yeah. So that, I mean, that's another interesting change, I think. So this whole idea that home birth is really valuable because I know that you and I are going to have this experience, that's also changed. So I mean, I think there's probably more to say that I've left out, but that's sort of the story. So you can see, to me, the real interesting dynamic is what's underlying. It's the culture that's underlying how women think about, can I give birth? Where do I want to give birth? Can I trust my body? Can I trust my caregiver? What's the safest place to give birth? And that's another, working in this boundary between ethics and maternity care, one thing I'm really interested in is how do women come to understand birth and what's safe and what's not safe. And we haven't gotten into statistics, but I'm kind of on a campaign to make sure mothers know that if you're healthy and you give birth in the hospital, you're actually increasing your risks. All the data from studies in England and the Netherlands and New Zealand and few in America show that you're more likely to have an unnecessary intervention if you go to a hospital and you're a healthy woman. And from an ethicist point of view, that should be part of the informed consent. Welcome to the hospital, you're going to have your baby here. You have this percentage of an increased risk of having a cesarean that's not necessary. You should just know that. If you stayed at home, that wouldn't happen. But we don't do that, right?
What?
So where do women get information? They get it from, well, in America on cable TV, we have teen and pregnant and birth stories, which are all about, bursting uteri and blood and screaming. And now the Netherlands has imported these programs. So you can watch Helse Bevalling, which Hellish Birth is a cable show you can see in the Netherlands. So if you're a pregnant woman having your first baby, you're watching this, it's like, oh my God, this is scary. I can't do this at home. I need all the equipment around and all the technology around. Anyway, so the story there basically is you have the way you organize care, and I understand health insurance in Israel doesn't pay if you have a baby at home. That's huge. That's a giant disincentive. But you also have the cultural attitudes of the women, of the midwives themselves. Because you all are part of the movement, but a lot of midwives are not with you. They probably think you're crazy. The attitudes of gynecologists. So those things all work together. And I guess it's bad news, because how do you change a culture? You know, how do you...
You make us feel that their problem is even bigger and much more huge than what we felt before. Seriously, because I think the majority of our problems is the military attitude. The whole society here is structured differently because of the way we live in Israel, because of the threats around Israel. It influences our life all around. And socially, how do you convince all women that it's actually less safe to go to the hero doctor than to come and trust yourself and your body? It's massive. It's a massive change to do.
No, it really is. But there's no magic bullet.
We know.
You know, so what you need is you need journalists, and yet these stories need to get in the paper. Another factor that speak of journalism, because it works the other way too. In the Netherlands, there's too much information here, but there were a number of studies that were done that were really not methodologically sound, but they got a lot of attention in the Dutch newspapers. So headlines would say, you know, really striking memory is on one of the daily newspapers, a national newspaper in the Netherlands, a picture of a baby taken from over the mother's shoulder, just being brought out right after birth. And in English, actually, it said, "Don't try this at home." And then there was the cover of the newspaper, the whole front page, and then the story about this study saying midwives might not be as safe as we thought, and more babies might be dying. Well, that certainly doesn't help. But what it does show is the power of the media.
Oh, we know that.
So if we can get the story told in the other way.
We're trying our best, but it's difficult to get them.
No, you raise the question, how to change the culture, yes? So you may continue.
Well, you know, it's a good question, because in graduate school I also studied the sociology of law. And so when I think of that, how do you change a culture? And the idea, does law or do regulations come from culture, or do they change culture? And there's a classic kind of long-term case in America about the laws about segregation between blacks and whites. And now you can't use a law to just change somebody's attitude. But when we changed law, it just created a different situation, and attitudes followed. They actually followed. Are you willing to be together with a black person in a restaurant? Well, you know, before those laws, we were like, no, I can't do that. And now, well, I don't know if people are happy, but it seems to me attitude changed law. So what I've always thought is, why can't we convince our health insurance systems, this is true in America too, why can't we convince them that birth in the hospital is more dangerous, and it's more expensive, and it's less satisfying for a lot of women? I mean, there's data on that too, but that's really a hard story to sell. When I started this work in the 1970s, late 1970s, I thought, well, midwives are going to be the answer, because in America we're moving more towards health maintenance organizations, where everybody kind of pays into a big pot, and then that pot's used to pay for care. So you think the managers would say, if you can tell me there's a way to have healthier babies for less money and the mothers are more satisfied, what's stopping you? But there was something stopping you.
Capitalism.
Pardon?
Capitalism. Ego.
Yeah.
No, because I think you're selling a product when you're doing a cesarean. You're selling a product when you're doing intervenances that you need medicine after. You're selling something. So giving birth for free is not very. Yes, exactly. And insurance companies don't pay in Israel. It's I don't know. I think hospitals get the same money, No, I don't know who pays and who doesn't, but I think it's not about that. It's like they want it to cost more money.
Right. So it's you're saying there's a cultural thing though. It's a consumer attitude. So I'm a consumer, which term I don't really like, because to reduce me to somebody's like a little Pac-Man, I just go around and consume things. But that idea that, okay, I want the most services I can have.
No, even if you don't want, it's not your choice, because if you go to give birth in a hospital and you will get more interventions, then you will need more services. That's it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know if you know the situation in Israel right now in terms of economics of birth, but every birth in a hospital nowadays, the hospital receives 11,600 shekels from the government, from national insurance, for that birth, for hospitalization, care, whatever she needs during the 3 days that the woman is in the hospital. And if women nowadays want to choose a natural birth room, they have to pay an added 4,000 to 6,000 shekels on top of
From
that.
themselves.
From themselves. On top of that, if they receive a room without the medical equipment,
It costs more.
It costs more. Then and it's becoming a consumerized factory. So the government, the national insurance, health insurance, and the insurance companies are all shaking hands together, and they're very happy about that. And they wouldn't want to release
Of course not.
more towards home births
No.
and the home birthing women in Israel, not only they don't receive the what do we call it? The child support
child support
package that every woman receives, allowance. They have to pay from their own pocket, of course, for the private midwife that comes to your home,
Yeah.
or the doula, or whoever comes home. So they receive absolutely nothing.
and no cover for the birth.
Yes.
Yeah, no cover for the birth and no allowance after.
You
No
have to
allowance
have
after?
money.
No.
Why
Like a
not?
punishment.
It started, it's not a punishment.
It's
They
not a
claim,
punishment.
whenever we addressed the government officials, they say that it all started in the early 70s or early 60s when Bedouin women from the desert were giving birth in poor environmental conditions. They wanted them to come to the hospitals to get a better care. Okay, we're not there
Oh.
anymore. Even they come to the hospital or give birth in a proper environment, and they don't want to release that. They simply do not want to release the allowance. And every 1 or 2 years, there's somebody who's fighting in courts to try and receive that allowance, and so far they didn't succeed. Now we're trying to head a lawsuit, a huge change together with lawyers here in Israel to try and change many things. First of all, the regulations around home birth, or maybe first of all, before that, is generally the rights of women in birth.
Yeah.
There's actually no law in Israel dealing with the rights of women in birth in Israel. There's no specific law for that. Then the regulations of the health insurance, the health ministry, that are very narrowing down our steps in home birth. The third issue is the finance, that all women will deserve to choose which way they want to give birth and have it covered completely by the government. And it's early days now, but we've started the talk with lawyers and media offices that will help us do
Are
a
you-
campaign about it.
Is anybody here familiar with, there's a website now called Human Rights in Childbirth?
Yeah,
You know about this? So I mean, because that'd be an interesting connection. Then you know, some of you know, the European Court of Human Rights had a case, and they decided that every woman in the European Union has a right to choose a home birth.
Yeah, but we're not connected
not
to the...
But some lawyers should be able to point to that and say, look, we want to be
Yes,
behind
we
Europe.
Yeah, we're trying to head in that direction. They all know about the film about Anatonoff.
Freedom for Birth.
Yeah. we're heading there, but it's early days, and we will need every possible help around it to get the correct information forward.
Yeah, it's another story. The UK is not really a giant success story, but in the UK they went from about 1% home births and now it's about 3.5%. Still small, but what happened there has to do with politics, and I don't know if anyone in this room knows politicians in the Knesset or something, because what happened there was the National Health Service, the NHS, had a policy of encouraging women to give birth in the hospital. That was their official policy.
Yeah, and they changed it.
But there was a committee, and it just happened that one of the legislators on the committee had a daughter who gave birth at home. I mean,
That's what we're looking for.
This is what has to happen.
That's exactly what we're looking for.
And this committee then made an official report and said we're no longer, it's not any longer the official policy of the NHS to encourage women to have babies in the hospital, because the data shows it's as safe to do it at home.
Yeah. And what we were saying earlier, that what changes the culture, laws or the culture or the people push forward, you know. And we're actually understanding now from all the meetings we had with the lawyers and the media advisors, is that there's probably not going to be any other way except for initiating a law that deals with women's rights in birth. And within that law, we will be able to force it and bend it to change all the different regulations and aspects of finance around it. But without that law, probably it will be just another fight with the Supreme Court or another fight with the local court. It won't end up in a big change.
I have to
where we
say,
want to be.
what you just described to somebody who's an outsider seems ridiculous. And I mean, it just seems ridiculous.
It is ridiculous.
It seems to me that that's a pressure point. That if people from outside of Israel could write and say, "We understand your system," well, maybe that doesn't work here, and it should be an embarrassment.
We know better.
Yeah, that's the problem. Huh?
Israelis always know
I think
better.
that the biggest problem here is that we are not able to succeed in convincing the medical authorities here that home birth is really a safe option. This is the big problem. Despite all the research, despite all the data, and we're constantly giving it to them. Maybe they're not reading it. What? We don't know. But they still, the public opinion is home birth is dangerous, hospital is safer, and the doctors, the obstetricians, the powers to be, this is what they really believe in, and they're sticking to it, and we can't move them from that feeling that birth is safest in the hospital. This is the big problem as I see it.
No, there are other.
There's other
like
problems.
peace and, you know.
Sure, but I mean, in our field, this is the big issue here. If we could convince them that it's safe, they'll save money. That's good too. But if the safety is the big issue, and they keep throwing that in our faces all the time. And I'm
Goes back to the
safe.
heroes, because doctors here truly believe that they're heroes, that they're saving our assets, that we're totally irresponsible women,
Right.
that we totally don't know what we're talking about, that we're completely irresponsible, that we're endangering our own lives and babies. They're convinced.
And data doesn't change.
No,
No,
No, because it's a belief. It's a belief thing. It's not.
it's a cultural. It's like
It's
it's
nothing to do with science.
No, right.
Belief. It's just belief.
Historically, that is not the whole truth. Historically, in Israel, the Gynecological Association is extremely powerful. Since the early 1930s, they have established a very close connection to whoever was in power and had huge budgets to run experiments on women. And really, gynecologists in Israel have managed to establish the position as leaders in the area of IVF and stem cells research. They tend to pass over all ethical boundaries, and they can do that because they get enormous support from the government, from the health ministry, and that's nothing new. That's very, very. I'm a sociologist, and I supervised PhD on IVF. And what was interesting there, connecting to what you said, is that in Israel, women do not treat their doctors, the gynecologists, as heroes. They treat them as gods. and the opposite, and to the other direction as well. God do not treat themselves as heroes. They treat themselves as gods. And we had huge stories here where gynecologists could steal eggs from women. They do whatever they want because they have completely free territory to do whatever they want. It's very, very difficult to try and raise opposition to doctors. But Isha Leisha were trying recently to do things in the parliament, and perhaps there are first steps in these directions in lowering their powerful position. But it's very, very difficult.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if there are any psychologists in the room, but it's interesting to ask, what are gynecologists so afraid of? And I mean, I think my experience with American obstetricians is, I think most of them are afraid of birth. And so when birth happens, I mean, clearly they don't trust birth. So they want to be there with monitors and ready to intervene at any moment. The contrast with midwives who trust birth. It's like...
This is why we are losing, because we don't... I'm sorry.
No, okay, just because as a gynecologist, I want to...
You're a gynecologist?
Yes.
You're the bad guy!
I'm from the bad guys. Okay. I think that if we want to make some change, I think one of the main reasons why we, or gynecologists, work in that way is because we are afraid of being sued because of malpractice. And the question is that there are some other countries where the situation is different. When there is a damage in labor, the national insurance pays for that directly. There is no needing to go to the court. And I think if this system it were in Israel, so the way of giving birth in the hospitals is very, very soft and different. Because also gynecologists want this change. So if Nashim Korot Laledet and other movements join doctors in order to change this, to make a different policy, and this can make a big change.
Yeah, insurance is a big stakeholder.
Yeah. I mean, that's often said in the United States as well. It's a question
Yes,
about
but the question is doctors and movement against lawyers. You understand? Because who is taking the money? Lawyers are taking the money now, and this money it makes the basis for the fund to give for damages in labor. So it depends where you put this money. You understand?
Yeah.
So why it's difficult, or why we cannot change in that way? So I think this is a step for a big change. So this is what we have to see in what way we can make this change.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Malpractice is a tough issue, actually. I'm doing a project in the United States on electronic fetal monitoring, which you probably know has no medical benefit. But in my country, it's used on about 85% of all women are monitored electronically. And the women are never told that it has no benefit. It's just part of, you come in and they put you on a monitor. And now we have remote monitors, and you can take the monitor in the tub. But still, it's a monitor, and it has no benefit to you or your baby, except that you might have a C-section that's unnecessary. That's the only thing that all the research has shown for.
But all the research show that, even in the 80s and even now, in 2008 or 2009, and multi-center studies show the same.
Yeah.
But even those investigations we are still using the monitor.
I know.
Okay, so
And that's fascinating.
It means that science is one factor, but it's not. No, it's not the only one.
Right.
There are others, and we have to neutralize the others.
That's the question. Yeah. So I ask myself, I mean, how do you approach this? I mean, what I'm facing in the Netherlands now, because I'm sort of in an argument with a gynecologist there, and it occurs to me that this is not going to help Dutch midwives. Somehow we have to come together and we have to co-opt the gynecologist to remind them of the value of physiological birth. And I haven't figured that out yet, to be honest. But
I think because we are not scary. If we want to change the culture, we need to scare people. Because this is how I see it, how it works. You say press. What press does is it's scary. And we don't want to scare women further. So we can't say, if you go to the hospital, that's
really
the end of you. Because then they are afraid wherever. So we want to be less scary, and the less scary we are, the less effective we are, because we have no meaning. If
Only 12 shots.
yes, we can. Oh yes, you will be more healthy, more happy if you do home birth. So it has no effect on the public. So
you know, is there in America? I don't think this has worked, but American women are so hyper about protecting their baby. No soft cheese, no wine, no this, no that, and then they'll go to the hospital and it's and I think, can we point this out to them? That, you know,
can we scare them about Torah?
and point out that you wouldn't have a sip of wine, but now you're injecting this epidural, which is going to cross the placenta and be in your sweet little baby that you've been guarding so perfectly for 9 months. I don't think that's worked in the U.S., but it's one. You know, women are exercising, they're wanting to be healthy, they're willing to go out and run long distances and sweat, but then you say, how about having labor without any... oh, are you kidding me? Pain. I can't... Wait a minute, you've been having pain with all your physical lifting weights.
Yeah, but they run and take Advil. Yeah, seriously, a society that is so easy with drugs, over-the-counter drugs, they don't want to have pain, they don't want to suffer for 1 second. They have no tolerance or understanding towards natural processes.
It's crazy.
Give me a solution.
Did you have a comment?
I want to go back to the hospital and ask, how can we make, I'm a birth educator and I do that, and how can we make the difference in the hospitals? Because right now this is the mainstream, and most births happen in hospitals. How can we make the change? Is it in doctors? Is it in the women? I don't know. It's so frustrating. And how do you think?
Yeah, that's a question Dutch midwives are asking too, because as more Dutch women want to be in the hospital, they're saying, how can we promote physiological birth in the hospital?
Yeah.
How can we protect physiological birth in the hospital?
It's human rights. It's not only the women's human rights. It's the babies' human rights. Do you know that one of the major hospitals in Israel separates the mother and the baby for 4 to 6 hours after birth?
Most.
And
Most hospitals.
That's also ridiculous.
And it looks natural, and no one does anything, and we cannot do anything. It's their protocol, and this is it.
No,
That's it.
if there is a mother, if it becomes a mother that says, no, my baby is with me.
I did it.
No, listen, everything that happens in hospital is an agreement between the staff and the women. Okay? So nobody takes by force a little baby. Okay? Small baby.
But
so,
when you're with your first child,
the answer to your question is education. So mothers, they have to come to the hospital and stand on their feet and say no.
No, but it's impossible. It's actually so women that are coming to give birth. It's unfair. This is not where it's supposed to come from. They are supposed to be
In the
less.
actual situation, this is
It's a horrible answer.
But the fact is, I mean, it seems to me, back to this other issue, it would not be wise to go in the hospital and say, you know what, everything you're doing here is wrong. And let me show you all the literature about why you're wrong. I mean, that's what I want to do, but I don't think that's an effective strategy for getting those people on board. Because I know in the US, obstetricians really don't like women who come with a birth plan. You know, the idea of a birth plan is, this is describing everything I want in my birth. I want these people here, I don't want an epidural, I want... Obstetricians, they feel like that's right in their face, and so I don't think I have the way, but there must be a better way to gradually change them. You know what I'm thinking of? I don't know why this came to mind, but the story of Nathan and David with Bathsheba. So if you can't convince the doctors by just saying, here's the data, you know what Nathan did is he came to David and he said, you know, there was this farmer, and he had one sheep, and there was this other guy who had thousands of sheep. You know that story of Nathan?
Yes.
I mean, so if you could tell the story, like there was this doctor who read all this data, and it showed that this was safer than that, but this silly doctor insisted on doing this thing that actually harmed those patients. Who would that doctor be?
What is the percentage in the USA of women that choose the caregivers in labor? How many women choose the caregiver during labor?
During labor.
During labor. In the USA. אני שואל, כמה מהנשים בארצות הברית בוחרות את מי מלווה אותם בלידה? רובם, אוקיי, אז איך יכול להיות שהוא לא אוהב את תוכנית הלידה? אחרת היא לא בוחרת. אם היא בוחרת, מה זאת אומרת שהיא לא רוצה? אני חושב שהבסיס...
I disagree.
I just wanted to add something that I didn't before about the medicalization of pregnancy. Israel is #1 in the world in pregnancy tests, and more important in decision based on pregnancy tests. So more than in other places in the world, you will abort your baby because of a defect that was found in a pregnancy test, just on the basis of the scientific consultancy that you had. So this again shows you that in Israel the medical authority is very, very strong.
Yeah, and it's made its way into popular culture.
Yeah, and it connects to what Sivan just said about this idea of marketization, the marketization of the commodification of pregnancy and birth.
Yeah, nowadays they make money on pregnancy. Big money.
With prenatal testing and
Everything, testing, prenatal testing, birth. There's no like hospitals attached. After birth, you can stay in the hotel for another 3 days with.
from your own money.
Yeah, you pay for it, of course. They make huge money there.
Yeah, why not just go to a real?
Because there's nowhere to put your baby in that room with the nurses.
Because
They lift your baby with the nurses.
when your baby is sick, you have to have medical supervision. You can't just have hotels.
Yeah. It's not only the 6 hours after birth. Baby goes back
a
to
few
the
days.
baby room for a few days. Mother
want
comes
to-
and visits.
Who would want to be with your baby after birth? Yeah, now you're discouraging me.
That's how bad it is.
I mean, we need a sociologist to come here and
Yeah.
fully study and make clear what's going on here.
I wondered about this whole thing myself, the separation of mom and baby in hospital, and I've talked to people about it, and I spoke to I'm a childbirth educator and a doula, and some of the parents when I bring this up in class, so architects answered me on that one, and they said, oh, well, you know, Israel has this history of the kibbutz and the separation of the baby house and the parents living separately from the kids. So when they designed the hospitals, they also separated the nursery from the moms, and they put it on the other side of the floor, so moms actually have to really take a long walk to go to their babies. And hospitals that haven't been updated since the 1960s are still basing their decisions on old architectural choices.
Very interesting.
I mean, that's a really interesting contrast with what I was saying about the Dutch. Because another thing I didn't bring up is the Dutch have this word that seems peculiar to the Dutch, but I don't know other Germanic languages, called gezin. And it's a word for mom, dad, and children. So in English we have to say extended family and family, but they have a word for, and it's so important to them. I mean, their cultural idea is mom and father and children, but not like a kibbutz where the child belongs to the family, not to the state or not to the commune or not to...
But even the kibbutz concept is completely outdated here. It doesn't apply, and yet we're stuck with old architecture.
Not only that, but when when somebody tells you, well, maybe you want a doula, so they say what? To bring a stranger into the family of me, my husband, and my children? That's crazy. So it's not really sticking. It's just a weird excuse because we are very obsessed with the privacy of this small family.
Yeah. But you'll have your child separated from you for a few days.
Because the doctors tell you that they must test the baby, they must take care of it and check that it's fine and breathing.
Rest.
And then when he's 18, we have to take him again. Same idea. We know better.
Okay, so what are we going to do?
I just have one question about the Dutch statistics. Is the decline in home births not also influenced by the large immigration from Turkey, the Muslim countries, where maybe the people are living in conditions that are less suitable for home birth, or it's not their cultural norm for home birth?
Yeah, with the large immigration of people from Turkey and Morocco, those women actually want to be in a hospital, unlike native Dutch women.
Do you think that that's causing the statistics to drop?
Yeah, that's part of the story. But even though there's a lot of immigration, there's not that much to count for a drop from 37% to 22%.
I also met a Dutch midwife once, and she told me that the reason that they like home birth in Holland is that the Dutch people are very frugal, and the government realizes that they save a lot of money, and that's the big reason that they keep to the home birth, because they're saving more money. Do you think that's true?
You know, it'd be an interesting question to ask here. The Dutch have about 180,000 births a year, and if you think about, let's try to get the home birth rate back up to say 40%. If you do the numbers, it will save the government a very small amount of money. But in the book I wrote about it, I talk about the Dutch idea of zuinigheid, which is thriftiness. But it's thrifty also with your body. So we have a daughter who lives there now. She married a Dutchman. She lives there, and she's used to the American system. And so when she has a cold or something, she wants to go to the doctor and have an antibiotic. And she's so frustrated with the Dutch idea of just go home and gargle with some salt water. And she's like, where's my medicine? But it's not just because they don't want to spend money, it's because it's this zuinigheid. It's this idea of you don't need all this extra stuff. Just live normally, don't take extra medicine, it's not good for you. I think that cultural idea is more than just the money. So we're working with other midwife schools trying to make an argument about we need more birth at home. But when we looked at the money, we're not going to convince the Ministry of Health to save a few million euros. In the bigger thing, that's not much money. So I don't know what it would be here.
Do you know any place around the world the opposite happens?
Did what?
Where it went from, yes, New Zealand.
What happened there? What about the
It was having somebody in the government. There's a Karen Gillibrand, is that her name, dude? Yeah. She's a New Zealand midwife who's written. She's written a story. You should read it because I can't remember all the details. But it also had to do with the Maori population who were inclined to give birth at home. And here's another thing that this would be a dream in the Netherlands as well as here. When you're certified as a midwife, well, first of all, every woman in New Zealand has a right to have her caregiver wherever she wants her. So, I mean, the caregiver has to agree, but if you want your midwife in the hospital, fine. You want your midwife at home, fine. You want a general practitioner.
UK is not the same.
UK,
more or less?
It's kind of the same, but certainly you're not going to get a gynecologist to come home either in New Zealand.
No, but you can choose if you're giving birth at home or at the birth center or at home, and they would finance that.
Yes. Yeah, so that the government will pay for wherever it is. But here's the interesting thing about New Zealand midwives. To keep your licensure as a midwife in New Zealand, you must do 10 home births a year. So the idea when they created the legislation was we don't want New Zealand midwives.
Yeah.
Yes. There's only one kind of midwife in New Zealand. It's not a nurse midwife or they're just one midwife, but all midwives have to do 10 home births a year. So, and the idea is to keep midwives focused on what's a physiological birth. Keep your skills at doing a birth without all the medical equipment around you. And so now they're up to about 7%, 8% home births. Could you imagine? I mean, if you can make that into law here, you'd automatically have...
Wonderful law. I'm sure.
No problem.
No problem.
What about Canada?
Yeah, in Canada it's had a change. They more or less imported the Dutch model. Started in Ontario.
Was that politics though? How'd that happen? Was that someone in the political system? Do you know?
I think they also, Ivy Bourgeot wrote a book about this. I can give you books you can read, but there was something that happened in the political system. I think the Canadians were convinced by the data, the legislators were. It's like, yeah, okay, we have this data. But still the numbers are quite small there. It's gone up, but I think it might be 2% in Ontario, and Saskatchewan's different. So it has to do with legislation. It has to do with getting midwives organized, and it seems to me a little bit I've heard, there are hospital working midwives who don't care about this. But getting all the midwives on the same page and then having them as a politically active voice would be helpful. But
yeah, you say that they're untalkable.
But you can't convince them it's in their self-interest, huh?
No, they're too busy survival because not only this, but they are treated very not good, like מבחינה סוציאלית.
Socially.
Yes. So they're fighting for working less hours in better terms. So I think this is the last thing that interests them is, oh yes, and I do 10 home births a year. This is, and also it's like telling them you're not good enough as you are. So it's also a big problem.
But the history and tradition of midwifery around the world is physiological birth.
No, it's not true.
Not in Israel. The midwives here are taught mainly the medical model of birth, and they're taught mainly by the obstetricians.
But can't you have them harken back to those great midwives in Egypt, the Israeli midwives? Oh, we can't, sorry, the baby comes too quick, we're not there to take all the boys.
No problem.
Oh, you're such a pessimist.
No, I'm a great optimist. I'm sure that it's an educational thing, and we're trying now to think how to make contact with the midwives and doctors while training, and meet them and expose them to those strange ideas of physical birth and the needs of a woman while birth, and maybe that will make the change, because I think it's like lighting a candle, one by one by one by one. So each one of us has got her surrounding to influence, and so on. So that's the way I think.
What's the ratio of obstetricians to midwives in Israel? far more obstetricians and midwives?
Probably.
Many midwives.
Born midwives.
Many midwives.
But we don't know really.
Because in most European countries, there are far more midwives than there are gynecologists. In America, it's completely the other way. We have like 50,000 obstetricians and about 8,000 midwives.
No, there's many more here, midwives.
Well, that's something to work with.
But we have no power. Midwives in Israel don't have power. They're low on the.
Women.
Yes, because it's a
They are
women.
women.
They don't. Their organization is not so. They're part of the nursing system. They don't have their own autonomous standing like in
Licensing
Holland.
board.
They belong to the Israel Nursing Association. They're a branch of the Israel Nursing Association. And they try to keep us down, so it's difficult. The home birth midwives have an organization, but we're a very small amount. We're only like about 17 in the whole country. So we're an endangered species.
You have a question?
I'm thinking that maybe in a way we should also think that a birth is not an event, it's a process. There's also maybe we should think also about the woman who is now just started her pregnancy and now going to where does she get the information? She get the information from her doctor, yeah. So she goes to the doctor and he's doing or she's doing her prenatal care, and that's the information she gets. And maybe if we had like a community services, like a community clinic, where midwives would give, the information, so they will see more of midwives. They will see more like home birth midwives. Maybe it will be different. They will meet each other. I think maybe could be maybe one.
Well,
one angle.
I'm sure many of you are aware of the idea of centering pregnancy. You know this concept of centering pregnancy, which it might work in the same context. The idea is for poor women in the United States, I think maybe it started in the UK, instead of a normal prenatal visit where you come just by yourself and then you get weighed and measured, and you have groups come and they do that for each other. They measure, they weigh, they ask each other questions, and it's improved the health of the women and their babies tremendously to have women caring for each other under the supervision of a midwife, rather than just you and your obstetrician. I can't remember if it started in the UK or the United States, but if you Google centering pregnancy, there's a whole way of organizing this kind of care. And it's remarkable. It's in the terms of better outcomes for women who would otherwise have trouble because of their low income, lower education, poor eating, no exercise. This encourages them.
Because most women don't even know the concept of home birth. They have no idea that it's actually good, and they don't have the link. They should have much more link in the field itself.
I want to get myself into this adventure.
They think that we're quite cave women, weirdos. That's the majority of what women
Uneducated.
Yeah, but if you say I have here like you see the mama zone, okay? What's this whole story about the mama zone? Yeah, how come so many women are there? Because so many women really thirsty for education.
And then when we give them some information, I don't know if you saw yesterday's issue about the article. 460 comments. The majority of them were pure garbage.
Because they don't know.
Of course they don't know.
They don't want to know.
They don't want to know. When we try to educate them through groups like that, it's just to tell you what this Mama Zone is. It's a Facebook group in Israel that right now they have 26,000 women in that group. 26,000. It started less than a year ago.
Well, so she's right.
We're
There's
trying.
something there.
We are trying. Each of us, I think, posted something about physiological, natural home birth. Blah. We're trying, but we're mostly being attacked there by the mob. Mostly.
I'm saying let's bring the midwives, okay, even the home birth midwives, like to open a clinic, for example, for instance, like a clinic, like community clinic, that women can come and get information.
Okay, that's fine, but the average Israeli woman is not going to want to come to that clinic.
Yeah.
She's going to want to go to her doctor and have an ultrasound.
I know so many women who would love at the 40 weeks, they would love to come to a midwife who will check and not go to the hospital
But if
to
it would
check
be for
how
free.
they, how's the baby and what's going on, everything is okay, to ask a question, to have a bit massage, you know, and to speak a bit with a woman, and not to sit, you know, every 3 days to go to the hospital to check, you know. It would be much more.
It's true, but
I
only
think it would be
people-
tremendous. It would be great.
I
Really.
think that if we can do like a clinic like this for free, or something that is cheaper than what they're
Exactly.
already getting, but I think that we are coming back again to the problem that yes, that home birth is not only the same, is it much more expensive than birth and
It will bring
everything.
for the midwives. It will bring more customers. So maybe you can get, you know, the midwives to do it freely for the community, and then accepting more. We can talk about this as details, you know.
Yeah, it's like that.
I said, you
think
know,
we should
Not a
start
bad
at some
idea.
point.
It's just very expensive.
To hear what you have to say about birthing centers that are outside hospital but not in
Freestanding.
I mean, actually they're appearing more in the Netherlands as kind of a middle ground between the two. And I've always thought, theoretically, that would be a way to get women to have more physiological birth, and maybe even convince them after their first birth at a birth center, why do I go to a hospital? This was so easy. Why don't I just stay in my own home? I know the statistics, this recent study from the UK on the safety of place of birth, the birthplace study, I don't know if you've seen it. They compared birth at home, this was with a group of women defined as healthy by a set of criteria, and they couldn't randomize them, of course, it was just let's follow them. Home, freestanding birth center, alongside the hospital birth, and then in the hospital. And there was essentially no difference in outcome, except for more interventions at each step of the way, the closer you got. But from that point of view, they were safe. And I do think it's kind of if women are afraid, I need to be near technology, a birth center is a step closer to technology than, oh, my home, how could I have a baby here? Where's the
Now the government, in the recent renovation of the protocols for home birth, they put in a special clause that a woman is allowed to give birth in her home, she's allowed to give birth in her hospital, but in no other facility. That's a new something.
And are there birth centers here?
No.
There were very few, and they're
There
actually
are.
saying you should close with these new regulations.
How did that happen?
Power
Game.
Money.
They were doing so they done
They thought that it's too
You know,
many
let
are
me-
opening up, it's competition for the hospitals, they
Or how
want
can-
the
how can
money
we
to go to
control
the
them?
hospitals.
You know, let me make this observation, because I agree with you about capitalism, but I've also been convinced, because I've been in this world since the late 1970s, most obstetricians, when I work with birth activist groups, you get the impression that they're thinking obstetricians are like, if I do a cesarean, I make more money and it's less work. And that could be part of the story, but you have to understand how they're socialized. Back to my comment about not trusting birth, they really think the more medical things you do, the safer it is. They're completely, maybe with the exception of our colleague here, but they're convinced of that.
Yes.
And the idea that you could do this without medical technology goes against all their years of
What
medical
they
training.
studied.
And it's somebody said it, it's telling them that what you know isn't really what's true. So that's a huge hurdle to tell them you've been studying and you've had all this experience, but guess what? It's not really the truth. So it's not just can we
for the
convince
majority.
them, it's what they really, really believe. And I've known midwives in the US who've been home birth midwives and then gone to be nurse midwives, and even they get changed by the experience. There's a well-known midwife in the East Coast, and
Yes, but regarding the issue of home birth, there are some investigations, more than some, a lot of investigations, and there are a lot of investigations also on the monitoring, but they know that the physicians know this investigation, but even though they do not choose for that.
Because
You
the
understand?
insurance
So
company tells them to.
Yeah.
Didn't the birth centers in the United States die out for lack of insurance?
Yeah, they didn't really catch on. There was a nurse midwife from Cleveland who was really pushing this idea as a way for midwives to have more autonomy, but there's some in-hospital, but they haven't really caught on. So it hasn't been, I mean, it seems to me like a great idea, but for economic reasons, I think because a midwife trying to create one, you have to go to a bank, you have to get a loan, you have to do all these kind of things. So, and insurance.
You know, we have no insurance here. We can't get malpractice insurance.
If you're a home birth midwife.
Yeah.
But in hospital?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's can be dangerous.
That's why we're from 17, 16 home birth midwives. Another big reason. Another big reason.
And huge trust of labor.
Yeah.
It sounds like there's a common problem for the doctors and the home birth midwives. Sounds like there's a common problem. What you were just talking about. And now what Ivana's talking about is practically the same issue. But yes, coming from two different sides.
Insurances.
Maybe we need to just approach all the insurance companies.
Yeah. Okay, so what are we going to do?
We're doing.
It sounds
Slowly,
like
we're doing.
Yeah.
You thought it would be here with few people. Look around.
Yeah, this is a start. It's
But
true.
our Facebook group is 1,600.
And I
We're
haven't
slowly
checked yet.
growing. We're slowly growing.
It's growing.
You know,
it's growing.
picking up on your idea, our youngest daughter is a midwife student in the United States. And her dream, and I think it's kind of a dream, but I'm encouraging her, is to do what you're saying, but also to get to middle schools. So these are girls between the age of like 11 and 13. And educate them about their bodies, but also about, you know, how do you start then with how do you have a baby and what's the added benefit of more medicine or a negative, and work at that level. And that's the beginning of changing culture. But again, it's a small start. You go to schools.
I think that there is a major problem about how women see doctors and how they see